Okay, so now we're going to be going over, as you probably assumed, the atlas and axis vertebrae. So the first one we're going to, so first we're going to go over the surface landmarks of each bone, and then I want to put them together so you can hopefully understand better how they articulate with each other. So the first one we're going to go over is the atlas, and I'm going to spin it here so we're looking at it from a superior view. Now, you can tell it's superior for two reasons. Notice the articular facets are very deep here and have that bean shape, or I like to say semilunar, whereas on the inferior surface, yeah, they're much flatter. They don't have as much of that indentation, and it's oval instead of the C-shaped ones here. Okay. The second reason is you can look at the transverse processes, and you can notice how they're sloped downward slightly. It's actually, so that's what you want to see. If you're holding it upside down, you'll notice they kind of poke up, and that's what you don't want to see. Okay, so we have the superior and inferior figured out, and the anterior and posterior is a bit easier. So notice this arc here is a little small arc. This is the anterior surface, and on that surface you have the anterior tubercle. Okay, so then obviously the arc back here is going to be the posterior arc with a posterior tubercle located on it. That's that bumpy portion right here. Okay, so we still have transverse processes which are located laterally here and here, which have transverse foramen. Okay, and this is to allow passage for the vertebral artery bilaterally. Okay, and conversely, the anterior arc and the posterior arc allow for the vertebral foramen, which is where the spinal cord is going to transverse through. Okay, so just a quick recap: superior facet, anterior arc and tubercle, posterior arc and tubercle, transverse process, transverse foramen, and on the inferior side, we have the inferior articular facets. So the inferior articular facets are going to articulate with axis, right there. And the superior facets are actually going to articulate with the occipital condyles, and that's going to form the atlanto-occipital joint, which makes sense. Okay, so we're going to put that down. I'm going to jump to our friend axis. Sorry, depth perception's hard when you're doing these. So just like the one before, we're going to start in a superior view. And this one's a bit easier than Atlas because the odontoid process, or the dens, poke straight up. And it's pretty hard to miss because if you're holding it upside down, it doesn't really make sense. Okay, so this is the superior, which would make that, or sorry, this, the inferior side. Okay, and the odontoid process also occupies the anterior side of the bone, so this has to be the forward and be pointing up. Okay. The body is what you see scribbled with red here, and this is the weight supporting portion of the bone. And the spinous process here, you see at the back, or dorsal, and it's bifid. Okay. So just like in C1, we still have transverse processes here and here, and that still have that transverse foramen that allow for the vertebral artery. And we know our spinal cord goes down our whole back, so we still have to have a hole for that. Okay. On the superior surface, we have the superior articular facets, which I said before are going to articulate with atlas. And also on the inferior side, we still have inferior articular facets, which are going to articulate with the C3 vertebrae. Okay. So that's it for bony landmarks, but now just as a hopefully beneficial exercise, I'm going to put these two together. Okay. Since we can nod our head yes, and we can kind of move it as no, it's a bit harder to see or visualize unless you kind of see these two bones in articulation. But there's the three major, I like to call them, well, that's actually what they're called, the atlanto-axial joints. Okay, so the first one is between that anterior arc, which is shown here, and the odontoid or the dens. So this would be the first joint. The second one is between the TAL and the odontoid. So the TAL stands for the transverse atlanteal ligament, rather. And that's kind of where my little pointer is running over, in that transverse plane. It goes like this. So you can imagine a joint right here as well. And then third, between the superior facets of C2 and the inferior facets of C1. And so together they make that other joint. So those three joints in combination will allow for all of those movements, specifically the pivoting on that odontoid. Okay.